Before we begin today, we want to thank our newest patrons Vilda, Lauren, Nora, Laura, Katrine, Leanne, Felicia, Hannah, Rhonda, Suzanne, Katie, and Allison. Welcome to the team. And a special shout out to our patrons Marina, Stephanie, and Diana, who upgraded their pledges. As always, if you're interested in hearing Becca's first thoughts about persuasion, hanging out with us on Discord, and submitting your own study questions, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/pod and prejudice. I also wanted to flag that we've gotten several messages about the Elliots' social status since the season premiere of Pod and Prejudice, but we had already recorded this week's episode when we released episode 1. So your comments aren't going to be addressed until next episode, and we may make a few more mistakes in this one, but we promise we're reading your emails and your messages, and we love them, so keep them coming. And now enjoy this week's episode covering chapters 4 and 5 of Persuasion.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
We're doing it. We're persuading.
We are persuading someone.
I mean, who are we persuading?
Let's persuade. I've only had like one sip of coffee yet today. We're recording very early today, listeners.
Yes, it's an early morning record, so maybe we're persuading our bodies to revive in time to be entertaining for our masses of fans.
Yeah, exactly. We're persuading our brains to wake the fuck up.
Yes. Oh, well, that hit of coffee really did something for me. So my problem is that I tend to mumble when I get tired, so I'm trying really hard to not mumble right now.
You sound very bright.
Thank you. I feel not at all bright.
I love it.
Well, all that to say, this is Becca.
This is Molly.
We're here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to talk about Persuasion.
Ooh. Listeners, if you're new here, I, Becca, have read many Jane Austen novels in my lifetime.
And I, Molly, am reading her novels for the first time through this podcast.
If you want to hear Molly read through Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, or Emma for the first time, you can listen to seasons 1, 2, or 3 of this podcast respectively, but that is not what we're doing here today.
No, today we are talking about Persuasion, chapters 4 and 5 of Volume 1.
Yes, we are.
It's starting to heat up.
There's some doozies dropped in these chapters, including the ultimate it's in the title.
Oh my gosh. Let's tell the listeners where we left off.
Oh, yes, we have to do that. I've forgotten from the book episodes. So where we were is that we have our girl, Anne Elliot, our 27-year-old unmarried woman who is the ultimate middle child, stuck in a circumstance with her noble but poor and vapid father and her sister who kind of bullies her. And she's got a bestie named Lady Russell, who's a widow. And they're all decided that Sir Walter is going to lease his house to Admiral Croft and his wife, who are from the Navy, while Walter and his daughters go to Bath. And that caused Anne to blow a gasket over his brother-in-law, Admiral Croft's brother-in-law, who we, at the end of the chapter, didn't have any information about.
We were wondering who he is.
Whomst, if you will.
Whomst. He, as we learn at the beginning of chapter 4, is not Mr. Wentworth, but his brother, Captain Frederick Wentworth.
Yes. Captain Wentworth.
Captain Wentworth, which is the one thing that I was missing when I was like, I know that name.
No, I did the same exact thing where I was like, it's Mr. Wentworth. And then I was like, it's actually Captain Wentworth.
Yes. So Captain Wentworth, I was thinking that if I were Anne, wouldn't it be a bit of a stretch to be like, maybe he'll be here when it's his brother's sister's?
I don't think so, because the war ended and he doesn't have like his own place yet. I mean, listen, who's to say if he'll come to Kellynch Hall?
Right. We don't know.
We don't know. But I don't think it's crazy to think a brother could visit. I mean, that's the impetus for a lot of different action in Jane Austen novels, e.g., Sense and Sensibility.
True. Yeah, you're right. So Freddie, as I'm calling him, had at some time, this is his background. He had come to Somersetshire, which is where Kellynch Hall is, in the summer of 1806, when he had been made a commander immediately before something happened and the war ended, or like there was no work for him anymore. So he was promoted and then was like, "Sorry, we don't have a ship for you." So he had come to Somersetshire and was there for 6 months, in which time he and Anne fall in love.
Like, so in love.
Like Rojo.
Like, soulmate, like, burning passion, like, this is the essence of The Wet Shirt and Colin
Yes.
Firth.
Oh my god, yes.
Yes.
This is a quote about, like, their inevitability as a couple. "Half the sum of attraction on either side might have been enough, for he had nothing to do, and she had hardly anybody to love. But the encounter of such lavish recommendations could not fail."
Oh, yeah, and I mean, there's a bit she has in there, hang on, let me pull it up. I think it goes on to say they were rapidly and deeply in love, and that it would be difficult to say which had seen highest perfection in the other, or which had been the happiest, she in receiving his declarations and proposals, or he in having them accepted.
Oh, yeah, that was the next line,
Yeah.
and that was really sweet, and so then I was like, "Oh, they're engaged." But actually, she accepts his proposals, and then he goes to her father, and her father doesn't say no exactly, but he's just like, "What a degrading alliance," and basically gives them every reason to think that he's saying no, but he doesn't actually say no, so part of me is, like, trying to find the loophole and is like, "Actually, are they secretly engaged this whole time?" Because he doesn't say, "You can't get married." He says, "That would really suck."
I think he basically is just, like, revolted by the idea. Like, we just got through this chapter where Sir Walter describes how he feels about naval men,
Yes.
and to have his daughter, who he sees as, the top commodity, go for a guy who is trying to raise his rank in society, and also at this point in time has not done so, would be a complete degradation in his eyes.
Right. But would he just disown her? Like, would she accept that? I don't know. I feel like we'll get to what happens next, which is what I think you mean by the ultimate persuasion in the
Mm.
book. But part of me is like, but he still never said no. I guess they did break up. But okay, I'm reaching. I'm reaching.
Yeah, I think we can safely assume Sir Walter did not approve this match and did not say yes to it.
Sure, 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 sure.
Yeah.
So let's get into the it's in the title. Lady Russell also thinks it would be an unfortunate match because Anne at the time was only 19. And Lady Russell thought she would be throwing herself away for someone who doesn't come from money and is in a, quote, "uncertain profession." Because he hadn't saved up his money, he had I think it said he quickly spent all that he made, which I'm like, "Yes, I get it.
Yeah.
Same." Like, so he feels like he will soon be rich. He's very confident and, like, plucky. He's like, "Yeah, soon I'm gonna have a ship, I'm gonna be rich, I'm gonna be in the Navy, I'm gonna work my way up."
I think you can get a sense of this guy if you think about, like, who I'm picturing, not in this role particularly, but the essence of this sort of vibe would be like Jack Dawson in Titanic. That
Exactly.
sort of vim and vigor of a, young, brash man who's talented and smart and comes from nothing,
Mhm.
but is passionate about making his way in the world, and you can see that being intoxicating to a young woman like Anne Elliot, who, finds complete kinship with this guy who's just sees her when no one else does in her family, and makes her completely enamored with his ambition and his passions and his brilliant mind.
Yeah, it's exactly like Jack Dawson in Titanic, and she's a little bit like Rose, and I saw The Notebook last night on Broadway.
Yeah.
It's not exactly like that because Noah Calhoun doesn't really have those ambitions, but the story tale as old as time of, like, a poor guy and a rich lady who are in different statuses in society whose parents don't approve, like
Oh, you mean Jane Austen established a romantic comedy trope, or a romantic trope, I should say here, really, like, in the Regency era?
Yeah.
Yeah, seems so.
Yes. So, anyway, he's plucky, he's confident, he's bewitching. And to Anne, this is very hot, as you said. But to Lady Russell, it shows him as being headstrong and a dangerous match. Now, Anne could have ignored her father and her sister's disapproval, but Lady Russell, she's like, fuck. I really admire Lady Russell, and she's also her only friend. So she listens to her and is persuaded.
That's in the title.
That is in the
That
title.
is very much in the title.
She's persuaded that the match would be a bad thing, and she convinces even herself that this is right for him, that for some reason, marrying her would be bad for him as well, and she consoles herself that this is all for his advantage, but he's completely unconvinced, and he's so hurt that he just leaves Somersetshire. What possibly could she have told herself to convince herself that it was best for him?
Well, I mean, he's in the Navy,
Mhm.
so he's away a lot, especially trying to establish himself, and having a wife at home or on board would maybe hold him back in her mind. It's
Mhm.
Delulu.
Mhm.
She's clearly like reaching for something to justify the end to this affair, but it is clearly something that she's trying to make sense of, and for me more than anything it just shows how badly she doesn't want to hurt him,
Yes.
and then she really does.
Yeah, he's devastated.
Mhm.
It broke my heart. And she's devastated too. It takes her youth away.
Yeah, I mean, she's so devastated. This is like 8 years ago, and we've just learned that the rest of the Elliot clan is aging like fine wine, and for some reason, Anne is aging quicker.
Like cheese.
Poor Anne. Poor cheesy Anne. And you get the sense that, like, she feels she's so drawn in by her regrets and her lost love that it is physically taking a toll on her body, which, like, the drama of luxuriating in the pain of a breakup could never.
I kind of love this for her because when you think about it, she is so upset about this that she has not found anyone else in the intervening 7 to 8 years.
Yeah, remember, Anne Elliot is, like, when she's a young woman, a stunner. She's still pretty, she's just drawn and aging through pain.
She's got bags under her eyes now.
Yeah, I think you get the sense I don't, like, wanna spoil things, but I get the sense part of it is that she, like, has wasted away a little, she's, like,
Oh,
gotten
yeah.
thinner.
Yeah. And in this time period, we loved a curvy lady, and so let's bring that back as
Yeah,
a
yeah,
standard.
those empire waist dresses needed some bosom filling.
Yes.
Yeah, and basically, I think she was, like, this beautiful woman who was of noble birth and at the time, money, and so she was, like, extremely eligible. She was also, as we've learned, very good in society, people liked her, but she never made any efforts to court after Captain Wentworth because no one could measure up to him.
Yeah.
Ooh, girl, that is being hung up on an ex.
Yes, but, like, if it's your one true love, I get it.
I mean, it's stunning, it's beautiful, and it hurts my heart. I
Yeah.
got like, it's really, like, an interesting story, and we'll get into this, but there is so much to say about what Jane Austen is telling us through this story about and we'll get into it in the study questions, the economics of dating in Jane Austen. Graham, the sound effect. I mean, we can talk about it now or we can save it for later.
Let's save it for later because I'm sure we'll talk about it in the
Oh,
study
yeah.
questions. So, we learn that in the 7 years since, Anne has been too dependent on time alone. As you said, she hasn't done anything except for once going to Bath for a short time, which is why she was so depressed in Bath and why she hates Bath.
Mhm.
So, that's one mystery solved. At one point, actually, Charles Musgrove proposed to her. I was like,
Yes.
"That name sounds familiar," and when she said no, he went to marry.
So that's where you knew the name.
Yes,
Yes, indeed.
her dear brother-in-law. Charles Musgrove was, quote, "the eldest son of a man whose landed property and general importance were second in that country only to Sir Walter's." So here's my question, why isn't Sir Walter, like, proud of Mary for marrying him ultimately?
That's a great question, and the very simple answer is that he might be landed gentry, but he is not noble.
Mm,
Sir Walter thinks extremely highly of the family and very much clings to their nobility
and bloodline.
and bloodline. And Mary married someone very rich and landed gentry with a like who is going to inherit a plump estate in Somersetshire, but she didn't marry somebody noble.
Gotcha.
So it's a good match by any other measure. And
Yeah.
that's why Lady Russell was pushing Anne to take it.
Yes. When Charles Musgrove proposed, Lady Russell was like, "Wait a minute." This is when Nana's 27. Wait,
No, 22.
22. Lady Russell was like, you could be picky at 19, but at 22, you should probably start accepting some matches."
So I mean, this is where Lady Russell her errors start to show because at 19, she's like, "You have so many options ahead of you." And then she thought Anne would just pick a very reasonable match. And then when Anne turns down one of the most reasonable matches in the neighborhood, she is sort of perplexed and she's like, "Okay, well, what are you gonna do?" And then Anne just doesn't court. She doesn't try. She doesn't find herself a suitor.
Yeah, and Lady Russell is stressed on her behalf.
Mhm.
She and Lady Russell never talk about Wentworth and what happened when she was 19, but Anne has started to think differently as she aged about the whole situation. She doesn't blame Lady Russell for what she did, but she thinks that if a young lady who was in her position had come to her now, knowing what she knows, she wouldn't do what Lady Russell had done. She is persuaded
It's very much in the title.
that even if everyone disapproves, she should yet have been a happier woman in maintaining the engagement than she had been in the sacrifice of it.
Fascinating, right?
Yes.
First of all, do you blame Lady Russell?
Do I blame Lady Russell? No. I mean, a little bit because Lady Russell has shown some classism that is very common in this time period and particularly in this book so far. So, like, that's the norm. But I think that Anne was young at the time and that she trusted Lady Russell, and so she had a very malleable mind and was, like, very willing to go along with it. I don't blame her for going along with it, and I don't necessarily blame Lady Russell for doing it, but I think that if Anne had been a little bit stronger of, like, willpower at the time, maybe well, her dad had already said no. Do I blame Lady Russell? I don't know, I think it's an unfortunate situation, a little bit.
Yeah, I think we're led to believe that the if Anne had pushed for this, this would have happened even if she'd lost her family, she would have been okay with that. I don't
Yes.
think she would have lost Lady Russell. I think it's an interesting question of whether or not to blame Lady Russell because I mean, on one hand, you're correct that there is a "you're too young to make this decision" element to her advice, but in The Economics of Dating in Jane Austen, this to me is like the most quintessential again, we'll talk about this more in the study questions, the most quintessential boiling down of Jane Austen asking the question of whether to marry as an economic proposition or whether to marry for love. Because never in her other books are any of her heroines really meant to choose
Yeah,
between the two.
yeah,
Anne chooses to be more practical in her youth and then spends 8 years profoundly regretting that decision.
yeah.
And I wonder what that means Jane Austen is saying about the economics of dating in her society.
That's a very interesting point. I also will add, because we're about to learn that he does turn his life around shortly after they break up.
This is the worst.
This is the worst. So she turns him down because of, money reasons. And shortly after, he gets a job, he gets a ship, he gets promoted, and he makes a handsome fortune. Or at least she thinks he does based on her, newspaper stalking.
First of all, iconic Instagram stalking of the ex behavior from our girl Anne Elliott.
Yes, she's
Like,
been saving clippings and
no, what she is doing is she is taking screenshots of his life on Insta and being like, why is he so much happier than me? Second of all, there is nothing worse than an ex that is doing better than you.
yes.
Like, even if you have a good relationship with your exes, and like, this is not meant to say, like, be petty, hate your exes. Even if you have a good relationship with your exes, they cannot do better than you. That's like the golden rule of keeping a sound mind about your exes who like factor into your life in any way.
Yes, and to Anne, she does note that she has no reason to think that he has found a wife. Like, he is not married to her knowledge, and she's been keeping tabs on that. But what I'll say is that I wonder if some of her and this is maybe not fair to Anne, but she does live in this time period, if some of her regret is exacerbated because he is doing so well and because it turns out that her family was wrong. If her family had been right, would she still be as sad about it?
I think that's the like one of the key questions of the book. I think generally the answer is probably if he hadn't made anything of himself, she wouldn't feel this way necessarily because it's not. really discussed. But if he hadn't made anything of himself, she would not have lived a very good life. But I think the point being, if you met this guy, how could you possibly think he wouldn't make anything of himself?
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yes, he was always gonna make something
Like,
of himself.
if she met him and she just knew he was going to be Captain Wentworth, not just Freddie, then she should have trusted that instinct because it was correct. This is the big debate of persuasion. Like, was Anne right to do this or was Anne wrong to do this? And Jane Austen is making us grapple really directly with that question, like going to the heart of the economics of dating in Jane Austen proposition. I'm so sorry for all the sound effects, Graham, but we will work through them. Going to the heart of like marrying for stability and security and a place in society, or marrying because someone makes your soul sing. Like,
Mm,
that is the proposition that is placed at Anne's feet. And obviously, because it's a Jane Austen novel, he obviously makes his money. But she's asking these questions about, like, do you trust yourself? Do you trust that the man who you have fallen for will take care of you? Is that worth the trust?
yeah, and another question that it asks is who is I mean, you asked me this, but, like, who is at fault for this persuasion? Is it the person doing the persuading, or does it have to fall more on the person who is persuaded?
Who should be regretting this more?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really great question.
Mm. Now, Anne, over the last 7 years, has become a romantic. She had been forced into prudence in her youth. She learned romance as she grew older, the natural sequel of an unnatural beginning.
This is also, again, iconic, like, ex behavior where you're, like, really spending a lot of time romanticizing, like, the one that got away.
Yes, and she's a dreamer now. Like,
Yeah.
she has big dreams for herself, and she should have big dreams for herself if she turned down the love of her life. Like, maybe she thinks there's something else out there, but she doesn't. She thinks he's out there somewhere. Her heart hurts knowing that his sister will be at Kellynch, and many a stroll and many a sigh were necessary to calm her down.
This is where we learn that Anne Elliot is a relatable queen.
Yes, like, she just goes on her hot girl walks and sighs.
I too need to calm down sometimes.
Oh,
Like,
yes, same.
when I think about obviously this is less of a factor in my life now than it used to be, but like, do you remember like yearning and having to cope with that over someone
Oh, yes.
who was like in the past or unavailable?
You know I do.
Yeah. So the needing to stroll and sigh is the most like universal thing. This is why Jane Austen is timeless work.
Yes, exactly. She tells herself that she's being silly, that it's really no big deal, and to help her believe that, the only 3 people who knew about it, which would be Lady Russell, Elizabeth, and Sir Walter, have all been acting like it never happened for the last 7 years. But this does explain why her dad, or maybe it explains, I mean, a lot of things explain why her dad, but he was like, "Wentworth, that's you're just saying he's a gentleman? No, no, no."
I mean, it's part of like we could also read into a part of the reason why Walter and Elizabeth think so low of Anne.
Because she was gonna run off with someone in the Navy.
Yeah, she's this reckless idiot.
Yeah. True. She is glad that they're the only 3 people that know, and obviously, Mr. Wentworth, who had long since left the country, but he was single at the time, and he was living with Freddie Wentworth, and so he knew. But she's like, he was single at the time, he didn't tell the wife, and he's probably forgotten about it too. So, like, nobody's gonna talk about it, and she thinks that because of this, the Crofts can come live at Kellynch without any awkwardness.
She hopes there will be very little
Yes,
awkwardness.
she has her fingers crossed.
Yes.
But of course, there would be no book if there was going to be no awkwardness.
That's a great point.
So that brings us to chapter 5. On the day the Crofts are coming to see Kellynch Hall, Anne goes to Lady Russell's to hide. And the meeting goes great. Everyone likes each other, partially because the ladies, Mrs. Croft and Elizabeth, were like predisposed to like each other. They were like, this is going to go great. And partly because Mr. Shepherd flattered Sir Walter that the Admiral thinks very highly of him. So everything is agreed to on their terms. It says that there were no modifications to, quote, this indenture sheweth. And I looked in the back, and that does just mean that all of the terms of the contract were agreed to with no negotiations.
Yes. I also love this portion because it notes that Sir Walter is like, "Oh, you know what? He is pretty good looking for a naval
Yeah,
man."
he's like, "He's the best looking naval officer I've seen. He's fine." The admiral says to his wife, "I thought we should soon come to a deal in spite of what they told us at Taunton," which I thought was funny because it said that those 2 compliments were equal, and I'm like, "Wait, what did they tell him at Taunton?" And then I was like, "Wait, in spite of what they told us at Taunton, did what's his fucking face?" S
Shep?
No, well, yes, but I don't know what Shep said, but he seems like he's heard shit, so I'm like, what about Sir William Walter Elliot III, Esquire?
I think it's just that, Sir Walter has a certain reputation in these parts of
Okay.
the world.
He says, "The baronet will never set the Thames on fire, but there seems no harm in him." What does it mean he will never set the Thames on fire?
I don't know.
Like, that seems like, I mean, in my mind, that is like he's not gonna do anything big in the world, but he's fine. But why never set the Thames on fire? Listeners, if you know, hit me up because there wasn't a footnote on this one and it was a weird thing to say. Lady Russell thinks that Anne won't be allowed by her dad and sister to be of any use in their first journey to Bath. So she's like, maybe Anne can stay with me and I'll bring her to Bath after Christmas. But she has plans that are gonna take her away from Kellynch Hall or Lodge, or I guess she lives in Kellynch Lodge.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that'll take her away from Kellynch for several weeks, so she can't make the full offer to Anne. Anne, meanwhile, decides that as much as she doesn't want to go to Bath, she would rather go with them to Bath than stay and suffer near the Crofts because she's gonna be like, "Is he here? Is he here? Is he here? Is he here?" But then Mary decides that she is unwell and she needs her sister.
Is that the final Elliot coming in for the sweep?
Finally, I really like Mary, and I'll explain why when we get to more.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, yeah.
So she's like, "I must have Anne," and Elizabeth says, "Then I am sure Anne had better stay, for nobody will want her in Bath."
'Cause Elizabeth is, I don't wanna use a rude word here, but
She sucks.
fuck Elizabeth.
Our patrons in the Discord were laughing about some compost jokes.
Oh my god, yes, because they were like, "Our guy Eddie is, compost," which I
Mhm.
still believe.
Yes.
He's getting better in the world.
Yes.
I think we can safely say Sir Walter and Elizabeth are un peu
Yeah,
garbage.
they are hot garbage.
Literally hot garbage.
They're sexy garbage.
Like daddy garbage.
Daddy.
They are I love that, daddy
Your
garbage.
daddy garbage, I love it.
Yeah.
So, Anne, poor Anne, would rather be claimed as good, even if it's in an improper way of being like, "I must have Anne with me," than to be outright rejected by her, family. So this works out for Lady Russell. Now Anne can split her time between Uppercross Cottage, where Mary lives, and Kellynch Lodge, where Lady Russell lives. This is all well and good until they learn that Mrs. Clay is going to Bath.
Mhm.
That's Shep's daughter, which is rude because they were like, "Anne can be no use to us, but we must have Mrs. Clay."
Why are they bringing Mrs. Clay?
Why are they bringing Mrs. Clay?
I mean, we have our podcast interpretation potentially of why they're bringing Mrs. Clay.
Yay.
Yay. Elizabeth cannot go to Bath without her lover.
Mhm.
There is another explanation, and we'll get into it as we talk.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into it. I can't think of a reason, but I can think of a reason for Miss Clay to want to go. Mrs. Clay. But I might be misinterpreting. Anne doesn't let this offend her, but she is aware of the dangers this friendship poses.
To whom?
To Elizabeth? To herself?
Why the focus on Mrs. Clay's looks?
Because she has freckles and a buck tooth.
We'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. Okay, so she's got freckles, she's got a buck tooth, she's got a clumsy wrist, which I assume means bad handwriting. And Anne thinks she's a nice looking person with an acute mind and good manners. And she thinks that her acute mind and good manners are more dangerous attractions than if she had been hot. Why is this dangerous? Well, I'm not sure.
We'll make our way there.
Yes, we'll make our way there. Let's talk through it. Anne tries to warn Elizabeth, if only to say she tried. She's like, "I have to do something, even if it doesn't work." So she goes to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth could not conceive how such an absurd suspicion could occur to Anne. I wrote same in my notes because I'm like, what is wrong with Mrs. Clay? I still don't know. But my guess is that she thinks that Mrs. Clay will distract attention from Elizabeth and steal potential suitors? Maybe? Elizabeth says Mrs. Clay never forgets her place in society, and she reprobates or disapproves of inequality of condition and rank in a match. So, like, Elizabeth bringing that up is what makes me think that Anne thinks that Mrs. Clay will steal suitors, and Elizabeth is like, "No, she wouldn't do that." Like, she knows our society's too high for her.
Do you want me to tell you or no?
No.
Okay.
Let's get there because I'm sure there is a better reason, but let's get there at the end.
We can leave this a little neither confirm or deny
Yeah,
if you'd
let's
like.
leave it a little confirm or deny.
Okay.
I think I the mystery of Miss Clay, let's keep it alive.
Some spice in the book, some clay laced spice.
Yes. So, Elizabeth says, "Our father has kept himself single for so long for our sakes, and he need not be suspected now." Another question, suspected of what? I don't understand. Uh, you could tell me that,
Well,
unless it's connected. Does she think that they're gonna No. She doesn't
what did she think?
she doesn't think that Mrs. Clay and her dad are gonna run off together, does she?
That is precisely what she thinks. Yeah.
No!
She is worried that this hot widowed lady who is beneath her father by quite a bit will tempt him. And the focus on the looks is she hot enough to tempt Sir Walter?
That was, like, my reach thought, like, I was like, "That would be crazy." So I didn't
No.
even write it down.
No, that's precisely correct. That's why I was like, I mean, I could tell her 'cause it's pretty spelled out here,
But
but
I was like, "No way." So that's why I didn't even write it down because I was like, "That I must be reading that wrong."
no, precisely that. If you
But
recall yeah?
she's his daughter's age.
And you've never known a rich man who to take a second wife who is the same age as his daughter?
No, I have. It's just weird because 'cause they're best friends.
I mean, it raises the question, why are they best friends?
Why does her dad let her hang out with this girl?
Why does this girl hang out with her? Gay, but
But also looking for a daddy?
daddy garbage.
What? Oh my god.
That was a beautiful thing to couch on, Mike. I'm really, really pleased.
Wow. I'm shook. I'm shooketh. I
Well, I mean, think about it this way. She could be like the wife of a baronet.
Did she say this to Elizabeth? Did Anne go, "You worry that Mrs. Clay is gonna try to get with your father?"
Yes. And Elizabeth basically responded, no, I love her to bits, but she's too ugly for dad. Don't worry.
Yeah, and Anne thinks too highly of her father if she thinks that he can get past her looks to her, like, sparkling brain.
And what Anne is saying is like, well, she might not be like the most stunning woman ever, but she is kind of pretty and
Mhm.
she's good at like holding herself in a way. Like, I don't know if you've ever interacted with shallow people like intensely, but the truth is that they actually are only so shallow. And we've already seen this happen with Sir Walter, where he was like, the men in the Navy are ugly.
Yeah.
And then he met Admiral Croft, who flattered him, and he was like, this man in the Navy is not ugly. Like, he is susceptible in these ways, but we don't know how this is going to play out. We don't know how this will fadge. And it is true that Mrs. Clay does not precisely match the description that some guy as vain as Sir Walter would want for himself,
Yes, but Anne thinks that, quote, "There is hardly any personal defect which an agreeable manner might not gradually reconcile one to."
which Elizabeth does not agree with.
No, Elizabeth is like, "An agreeable manner can't make an ugly person pretty. Leave me alone." And Anne is like, "Okay, I tried," and walks away. I wondered if Elizabeth heard her a little bit because she does mention that she has more at stake than Anne in this whole thing, so, like, she should just leave the decision to her.
I think it's more of a way to dismiss Anne, but it is true. Elizabeth would have a greater stake in this. She's currently the lady of Kellan Well, they let it, but she's the Emma Woodhouse to her father's Mr. Woodhouse in terms of like taking care of the house.
Mhm.
So she would lose more.
Yes. So, Sir Walter, Elizabeth, and Mrs. Clay all leave in good spirits. And wait a minute, but hang on, before we get there, does Lady Russell not notice any of this?
Lady Russell agrees with Anne on this.
Okay, but because so far it's just been like, why is she choosing this girl over her sister?
I mean, there's multiple reasons why Lady Russell is angry about the Mrs. Clay thing. Anne doesn't give a shit about Elizabeth. She doesn't like Elizabeth. Elizabeth doesn't like her. But she does care if her father gets married to Mrs. Clay. Lady Russell thinks that Elizabeth and Anne should be buddies and knows that Mrs. Clay is a social climber.
And I guess there's a little bit of why is Sir Walter choosing Mrs. Clay over his own daughter.
Yes.
So there's a lot. Anyway, the three of them leave, and Anne walks alone to the lodge, feeling sorry for herself and sighing. And Lady Russell already misses her friends, and they're like, you know what? Let's just go and get out of the way for when the Crofts arrive. So Lady Russell drops Anne off at Uppercross on her way to wherever she's going, these mysterious plans of hers. Uppercross, the area, has two superior houses. There's the mansion of the squire, which is short for esquire, or one of our patrons also mentioned that squire itself didn't necessarily mean lawyer, but was more of like a title for a person.
It's like a gentry title.
Yeah. So there's the mansion of the squire and Uppercross Cottage is what I think I'm getting. It's either that or that there's a mansion that has a parsonage and there's a great house that has Uppercross Cottage.
So there is a great house in Uppercross.
Mhm.
That is the Great Manor. Then there's Uppercross Cottage,
Mhm.
which is near the manor, and then there is also a parsonage that's pretty nice.
The parsonage being part of the mansion.
It's the
It's like the parsonage of the town.
yeah, I mean it's the Mr. Collins to Lady Catherine de Bourgh situation, or the
Right.
Mr. Elton hookup in Highbury. Like it's a nice house, not as nice as the great mansion in town though.
But Uppercross Cottage itself is one of the main houses of the town.
Yes.
Okay. So that's where Mary lives, and her parents-in-law live at the great house.
So you might understand why, like at this point.
Why they live in the two houses?
Mr. Musgrove
Mhm.
is the gentleman who owns Uppercross, the big manor.
Yeah.
His son, Charles Musgrove, is going to inherit it, but is also married and like has his own kids, as you quickly learn.
Yeah.
And they want their own house. So the Uppercross cottage is where they like live until, that he retires from being head of the house, essentially. And then
Yeah.
Charles takes over.
Yeah.
So until then, Charles lives in his own house with his wife.
Yes. When Anne gets there, she is surprised to find Mary alone. And because she's alone, she's very unwell and she's very out of spirits. Mary, we learn, is better endowed than Elizabeth, meaning I think she's better brain wise. She's got something going on upstairs,
Mhm.
but she doesn't have Anne's understanding or temper and she gets very depressed.
So my understanding of Mary, who is an icon and a fucking
I
legend,
fucking love Mary.
she's so funny, is that she is somewhere between her two sisters. Anne is like basically a saint.
Mhm.
She thinks very deeply and keeps it all very proper on the outside, but she's also got a very specific like understanding of people and souls. Like Anne is a special person.
Mhm.
Elizabeth is vapid and cruel and rude.
Mhm.
And Mary is kind of a basic bitch and a little bit self-important, but, like, not unfeeling or unloving. So she's totally fine when she's in a good mood, and she becomes genuinely impossible if she's a little cranky.
She's a little cranky. When she's cranky, she becomes the center of her own universe. She's like, "Why is nobody paying attention to me?"
There's also, like this is an interesting, like, psychological experiment Jane Austen has going on because you also learn that Mary is not as pretty as her sisters
Mhm.
and, therefore developed some sort of deep complex about it and has this desperate need for attention, apparently, always, that manifests in, hypochondria that would make Mr. Woodhouse blush.
Yes, I mean, you think about it, she's the youngest child, and she needs the eyes to go on her because otherwise no eyes will be on her. So it makes total sense. She's like, "Guys, guys, guys, over here. I'm sick. I'm sad."
You're so right about the Elliott sisters really, like, encapsulating oldest child, middle child, and baby.
Yeah.
No shade to eldest. We love you. You're not all Elizabeths, but, like, Elizabeth is, like, the parents' favorite, the head of the house, like,
The perfect one.
I mean, not the perfect
But
one.
she thinks she's the perfect
She
one.
thinks she's the perfect one, and then you have Anne, who's overlooked,
Yes.
and then you have Mary, who's desperate for
Yes,
attention.
and she's just loud about it.
Yeah.
Anne finds her lying on the faded sofa, faded because of all of the children, whining about how she's so ill she can hardly speak and she's been alone all morning and she's fully in melodramatic mode. And Anne is like, "Oh, well, you sent me a very cheerful account of yourself on Thursday." And Mary's like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I make do. I act like I'm okay." And then she says Lady Russell couldn't deign to come in. She hasn't seen her in years. Uh, rude.
I love Mary. I mean, she is an unhinged character. I love her
I
so
love her so
much.
much. Anne is like, "Where's Charles?" And Mary says he's out shooting. He left at 8. He hasn't been back. It's 1 o'clock. He said that he would only be gone for a little while. Where is he? And the kids were with her, but they were bothering her. So she sent them away. Ah,
Iconic, but we do learn she has 2 little
2 little
boys.
boys whose names are also Charles and Walter.
But yeah, I mean, name one after the dad and one after the grandpa.
It's just there's a lot of the same names going
Oh,
on in this book.
yes.
Yes, as there were a lot of Johns in Sense and Sensibility.
Mhm.
Anne is like, "Well, good thing I'm here. I always cure you when I come." And I like this about their relationship. Like, Mary is like, "I need Anne. She will cure me." And Anne is like, "I will cure you, sure."
Literally, Anne just comes and she's like, "I will give you a little attention,
Yeah,
and then you'll feel
she
better."
does. She always
Yeah.
feels better after a little tension. She asks about the Musgroves, and Mary says Mr. Musgrove stopped by, but he stayed on his horse and talked to her through the window, and the Miss Musgroves couldn't even, like, stoop to come by. And Anne tries to comfort her, saying, "The morning is young, they could still come," which is interesting because it is 1 o'clock. It is not morning anymore. And Mary's like, "I don't want them here anyway." And then she chides Anne for not coming to see her on Thursday. And Anne is like, "But again, in your letter to me on Thursday, you said you were fine."
I love this scene because as an intro scene, it tells you exactly the dynamic between these 2 sisters, and you can see Anne being the master of the emotional labor for Mary.
Yeah, she's so used to this. And she says that she had also been really busy, so, like, she couldn't have come before now anyway, and Mary is like, "What could you possibly have to do?" And Anne is like, well," and she lists all of the things that she had to do. She had to go through all the plants with their gardener and tell him which ones are for Lady Russell, which I guess she's gonna take care of some, or
She basically I think the idea is that she moved, like,
right, she
she
was
was
moving,
moving.
yes. She had to divide up all her books and music. There was something that she said she had to pack and repack because she had misunderstood what was happening with the wagons, and I just have this, like, headcanon that means that she thought that she was gonna be able to send some stuff with her dad and her sister, but then Mrs. Clay was coming and there wasn't room for her stuff, so she had to repack her stuff and, like, take stuff out because she's gonna have to bring it later, and that was just really devastating to me.
Molly is tearing up over this, like, imagined circumstance. It very well could have happened,
Yeah.
but
I don't know, it's just and then she's just like, "Oh, and there was something with the wagons," like,
very
she's
sad.
just so used to being walked all over. She also had to go to every house in the parish to take her leave. She was told they wished it. Who told her that? Who said, "Anne, go say goodbye to everyone for us"? Do you think that was her father? Do you think that he was just
Um,
sending her on a fool's errand, or do you think that's actually proper?
I think it's probably proper. I think that Anne probably did all of the work for the move, and her father and sister did absolutely nothing.
That's devastating.
Anne's life sucks.
Poor Anne.
But it's okay because as we've learned, Mary, while not a perfect sister by any stretch of the imagination, is at least a person who tolerates Anne's presence and is like at least enjoys her company.
She even requests Anne's presence. So
Exactly.
that's nice. We love Mary for that.
Yes. The bare minimum sister.
Yes. Mary says, "You never asked about my dinner with the Pools last night." And Anne is like, "Well, I assumed you canceled it because you're so unwell."
She's like, no, I was feeling better last night.
Yeah, she said, "No, I was fine." Um, Anne says, "Well, I hope it was a pleasant evening." And Mary's like, "Well, it was unremarkable." And the carriage was crowded because the Musgroves are so large, and that's why she thinks she's sick today.
Well, I think what she's saying is specifically that Mrs. Musgrove is large and that
Mm.
she had to squeeze between the two Musgrove sisters.
Yes, exactly. Well, poor Mary, your life is so hard. After talking for a while, Mary is basically cured. She's forgotten all about her illness. She gets up to fix a nosegay, which is a bunch of flowers I looked up.
I love this because, like, what happens is she starts, like, high drama, "I'm so sick," and then as she talks to Anne, she just literally forgets to keep up the ruse.
Exactly. And she's like, pops up, walks across the room, and then she's like, oh, I guess I'm feeling better. And so she proposes they go for a little walk. And she says, I assume you will not want to go to the great house until the Miss Musgroves call on you. And Anne is like, no, I don't stand on ceremony with people I know so well as them. Like, it doesn't matter. And Mary's like, well, they should still come first. They should know what's due to you as my sister. But she agrees to go see them. That's Mary's Elliot self-importance coming out.
Yes, exactly. So, Anne obviously has very little of this, and Mary has some of it, not nearly as much as her father and her sister, and she has, like, a heart underneath it,
Yes.
but she is certainly, like, less pleasant and proper than her sister and stands more on ceremony of her father's rank.
Yes, exactly. They go to the great house, and I think what's going on here is that Anne doesn't like the interior design of it. She talks about how there's pianos and flower stands and little tables facing every which way in direction.
I don't take that from this section. Maybe I'm reading too far into it, but I take an affectionate love of the little mess around.
Okay, because I was thinking that she was like, "It's chaotic in here."
I think she's enjoying the, like, homeliness of it.
She wishes she had something a little bit cozier
Yeah,
in
like,
life.
I think she wishes that she had like, her family is very stands on a lot of ceremony, and she loves Kellynch Hall, but, like, there's no warmth in her household, and, like, very clearly right away, you see, like, the chaos and, joy of the Musgrove household.
I like that, I like that. The Musgroves are friendly, good-natured people, but not very educated, and my response to that was like, "And they have a problem with Mrs. Croft?"
Where's their problem with Mrs. Croft? Here.
Sorry, what's her name? Mrs. Clay?
Oh!
Like
Yes.
like, if the Musgroves are uneducated, but, like, they're I mean, I understand they're landed gentry, they're not nobility, and neither is Mrs. Clay, and that's where, like, a lot of people's problems with Mrs. Clay come, but, like, why is it okay for Mary maybe I wrote this note before I understood about the daddy issues that she's going through.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened is that, like, the problem with Mrs. Clay is not her existence.
Mhm.
It's her wish to make a connection with the Elliot family, and just as by note of comparison, the Musgroves may not be educated, but they are wealthy and, like, landed gentry wealthy,
And Mrs.
and
Clay is educated. I mean, she has a lot of good points in their conversations. She's always bringing stuff up. Like,
Mrs. Clay is smart but not well bred, and she's the daughter of a lowly lawyer, and she is a widow with children already.
mhm,
She is not a good connection. She doesn't have many good connections outside of Elizabeth,
I see.
whereas the Musgroves are wealthy,
Mhm.
have a lot of children, and their children are, like, very well bred.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. The children have modern minds and manners.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
they are newer money. Like, the Musgroves are a somewhat newer, like, class of money
Mhm.
than, like, the Elliots, but they are not necessarily a poor connection to make in society, but the fact that you're confused by this is kind of Jane Austen's point, is
Yes.
that, like, Sir Walter's so snotty about the Navy and yet travels with Mrs. Clay is the point,
Got it.
that
Okay.
this is
Yeah.
all made up.
Yes, exactly. So there are a lot of kids in the Musgrove family. The adult ones are Charles, Henrietta, and Louisa. And the girls, who are 19 and 20, respectively, I think, just came back from school at Exeter. And they're accomplished, fashionable, happy, merry, of consequence at home, and favorites abroad, the happiest people Anne knows. But Anne still feels some superiority over them because she would not have given up her own elegant and cultivated mind for all their enjoyments in life.
Not like other girls.
Not like other girls. She's but she does envy one thing about them, and that is their sisterly bond, which she doesn't have with her sisters. They're friends with each other, and she wishes that she had friends and her sisters like that. At the end of their half-hour visit, Mary invites the Miss Musgroves to join them on the rest of their walk, and that is the end of chapter 5.
What a substantive set of chapters.
It really is. Lots
Yes.
lots happening.
Let's go to the study questions, starting with our patron study questions. Once again, patrons, if you are at the $15 tier on our Patreon, you can wait until Molly submits a Google Doc before we record, and we will take up your questions in the Google Doc and use them during the episode. So, again, if you join our Patreon at the $15 tier, you can submit study questions through Molly's posted Google Doc before our record sessions. And on that note, our patron study questions include one from Joanna. Lady Russell, villain, friend, or both?
Both, and I'm leaning towards friend because again, I think that she did think that what she was doing for Anne was what's best. Am I still mad at her? Yes. Like, it goes back to the question I asked before, which is whose fault is the persuasion? Lady Russell's or Anne's for being persuaded? They both had to partake in that. Like, she can't absolve herself of all responsibility, even if she changed her mind later on. So, I think that Lady Russell tries to do what's right by Anne. She just might have a different idea of what's right by Anne than what Anne thinks is right for her. So both, in a way.
I think both is totally correct. I will admit I get furious at Lady Russell reading these chapters.
Totally.
Like it's just so blind to really ignore how deeply Anne was feeling about this and act like it didn't matter.
Mhm.
I think like thinking it an imprudent match is understandable. She's a woman driven by class, which I think is something that Jane Austen is critiquing here. But I also think like the greater sin of Lady Russell is not just persuading Anne away from a match that clearly would have made her quite happy, but it is the inability and incapacity to understand what that would do to Anne. That for me is still troublesome about Lady Russell, the not talking about it with her when clearly it is something that has plagued her mind for 8 years is for me the thing that makes me like really upset with Lady Russell on these fronts.
Yeah, I think it's also especially devastating because Anne doesn't have any other friends.
She has no one to talk about Captain Wentworth with.
Yeah.
That's why she has to do all this sighing and strolling.
Yeah, she should really get a journal, but, like, also, it's just that, like, the one friend that she has didn't actually act in her best interests and, like, didn't actually think about what she wanted.
She was blinded by class in this circumstance. I think she did think she was doing right by Anne, not only Anne, but Anne's late mother
Mhm.
when she dissuaded her away. But in doing so, was sort of blinded by the constraints of their society, but also more importantly, wrote off what to Anne has been the most seminal, important decision she made in her life and wants her to just move on from it, which is not how you deal with your friends when they go through a breakup,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
Second question is from Janae. What are your feelings about the family dynamic of the Elliot family compared to the ones we've seen in previous novels?
It's interesting because every book that we've read so far, except for Emma, has been a sister story. Emma is its own special beast because it's Emma and her dad, and they have, like, this really beautiful thing going on, and I honestly, potentially my favorite family dynamic that we have because it's so sweet. They love each other so much, and they take care of each other.
Emma's such a flawed character that she only works if she's got this incredibly sweet and important relationship with her father.
Yeah, and if that's, like, the driving force behind so many of her decisions.
Yeah.
So they're the one thing, and then we've got all of these sister tales, and in all of these sister tales, some of the sisters love each other. The sisters all love each other. We've had, you know, issues like Kitty and Lydia are
Kitty.
Kittia is clicky, Mary is lonely and, nerdy, but, like, ultimately, Jane and Elizabeth, who are best friends, also love all their sisters. So that's that dynamic. Then we have the 3 Dashwood sisters who are all very close. This is different because we've got sisters who don't seem to understand each other. We see here that Mary and oh my gosh, it's gonna be so hard for me to not call Anne Elizabeth because I'm used to calling Elizabeth like Elizabeth being our main character from like Pride and Prejudice. But we see that Anne and Mary have a friendly relationship. But I don't think that Mary knows Anne the way that Anne doesn't have anyone who gets her.
You might understand why she would have carry such a torch for Captain Wentworth if he did.
Yes. Yes, I do. So this family dynamic is different because we don't have that sisterly bond and that friendship, and we don't have a father who understands his kids, and there's no Mrs. Dashwood, Mrs. Bennet.
Yeah, I think it's like I think the word that like immediately popped in my brain to describe the Elliot family dynamic is cold.
Yeah.
The other 3 books we've read so far, the main families have been very warm. Even the Bennets who have their issues, there's a lot of tenderness there, and there's certainly, like, the kindred spirit for each person, except probably Mary in Pride and Prejudice, but she's fine. I think that there is a chill in the Elliot family that forms Anne as a person in a big way because she is so internal and quiet and shy as a character. Like, she is so used to doing the emotional labor of those around her and no one doing anything for her. That character is forged in the fire of this, like, bad family dynamic, and it also makes you, like, ache for the fact that Anne's mother is not there to take care of her as well. It's, like, really sad.
It's really sad, and that kind of explains why she walks into the Musgroves' house and is like, "I love the warmth here."
Yeah, it's kind of, like, dropped in there when she says, "I don't need to stand on ceremony with people like the Musgroves."
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
there's, like, a friendliness to this dynamic and, a warmth to the Musgrove family that even if it's not as prim and proper as some others in society, like, is already setting us up for a more pleasant environment for
Yeah,
the next few chapters at least.
and it makes you think that she has to stand on ceremony, like, or that it feels like she has to stand on ceremony in her own house,
Yeah.
usually.
And even just, like, the way that Mary wants her to stand on ceremony with the Musgroves, and she's like, "Nah." Like, it shows you that, like, Mary still has a little bit of that as well, and, like, even in the scene, we joked about it a lot, but, like, Anne does a lot of emotional labor for Mary. Mary's doing nothing for Anne.
Oh, yeah.
So even if there is, like, affection there for sisters, like, there's not much care taken of Anne. So, like, someone needs to take care of Anne.
Yeah, come on. Well, thank you, Joanna and Janae.
Great questions. If again, once again, one more time, patrons, if you want to leave study questions, you can do so through our patron Google Doc that Molly will post before each recording. Okay. So now Becca's study questions. We've kind of run through some of these, but we'll kind of hit the points that we haven't hit yet. We've kind of finally got our big, like, bona fide persuasion. We've talked a little bit about persuader versus persuadee, but the role persuasion has in this book, what does it do to the story?
I don't wanna say it takes away a character's agency because Anne still made her choice, but it a little bit makes it so, like, whose choice was it really? And so I think that it puts the plot of the story on a decision that wasn't even Anne's necessarily. It also implies that one could be persuaded either way and that maybe she could be persuaded back and maybe, there's still hope.
Who's to say?
Hmm.
I would also ask what you think the persuasion itself says about Anne as a character.
Mm. I think she puts stock in the opinions of others, particularly ones she trusts. And that's also what might piss one off about Lady Russell is that Anne trusted her and she persuaded her to do something that wasn't actually best for her. So I think it shows that like she's not a pushover, but she's not bold enough to stand up for what she really wants because of the family that she grew up in and the coldness of that house. Like, she doesn't feel like she's not one of our, like, feisty, fiery main characters, you know? She's quieter and she's not bold enough.
Yes. I think it tells us that she's not the independent thinker of, like, Emma Woodhouse or Elizabeth Bennet or Marianne Dashwood. She has, of all the heroines we've covered so far, by far the most in common with Eleanor Dashwood, I think.
Yeah.
But it does give you this impression that she is someone whose mind is malleable
Mhm.
and can be formed by the thoughts of others. There's a question of whether or not that's a character flaw, though.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a flaw. I think she's a product of her circumstances and a product of her environment, And so I don't think that it can be considered a flaw. What I would say could I mean, I guess partially a flaw because I want everyone to be able to stand up for themselves, but you can't always it's not always safe to, and so I don't think it's a flaw. I think it's something she needs to grow through.
Okay. So we're going to skip around a little bit because we've already addressed some of our study questions, but I want to talk through tropes
Yes.
a little bit. We've talked a little about certain tropes that have popped up in this chapter, and I think we have some like dynamics immediately set up
Mhm.
for what we can expect this story to tell based on those tropes. So let's talk through some of the tropes we've talked about, and
Mhm.
if you have any others that jump to mind.
Status, like love across different statusi,
The rich girl and the poor
the
boy,
rich girl, poor boy trope,
the princess and the stable boy.
the princess and the frog, and yeah, so we've got like the Titanic trope. We've got pining, yearning. We've got a breakup where neither person wants the breakup, but they've convinced themselves that that's what's best for each other.
I feel like for me, the one that like really jumps out to me is the one that got away trope.
Yeah.
The idea of like this, for whatever reason, we lost each other here. What does it mean if we're thrown together later?
Yeah, I just read a book that is the same trope, and it's like after 10 years or whatever, they come back and they've hated each other since they left each other, and both of them are operating under the impression that the other person didn't like them anymore because it and I hate a misunderstanding trope, but it's similar in that, like, Anne broke up with him because she convinced herself that that would be best for him too. I think that if she hadn't convinced herself of that, she might have not ended up listening to Lady Russell, but she did convince herself of that. Anyway, the, like, "This is best for you, and now we're gonna be apart," and when they come back together, it's like, "Oh, you hate me," and they're gonna both think the other person is over them.
There's also just the question of time. What did time change about these two people?
Mm.
And like the question of like, you break up with someone and you are left wondering the what if for the rest of time because no one has made you feel the way that person made you feel. It's an incredible rom-com trope. It's an incredible romance trope.
Mhm.
And it was like this is where I got really excited about this book when I was reading it because I was like, this is not something I've seen Jane Austen really pursue at this point, and it makes for a really interesting and unique read in her books. I think.
Yeah, and I'm also excited about it because Anne, to put it more concisely than my ramblings before, Anne did not want to break up with him. She was persuaded to break up with him.
Yep.
So the longing and the pining is still there on both sides, but there's an external force making her think that they can't be together. So that's exciting.
Yes. What does this chapter tell us about how Jane Austen is thinking about love? And remember, this book was written later in
Mhm.
her life.
Mhm. Thinking about it as being later in her life, it's a little bit more like at this point in the book that love is a force that can be stopped, or not that it can be stopped, but that there are other things that can override love in her society, but love itself cannot be stopped because Anne is going to keep on loving Captain Wentworth for the rest of her life, whether she can be with him or not. But sometimes, in Jane Austen's mind, or in the society, sometimes that's not enough to still be with someone.
Yeah. I also think it could you could read it the like flip side way as well,
Mhm.
which is we've read 3 of her novels so far, and we've talked a lot about the economics of dating a Jane Austen. And we've talked a lot about love and Jane Austen exploring this idea that you marry for love and how important that can be. But conveniently, in every single book we've read, the guy she falls in love with is super rich.
Yes.
And so we don't actually have to grapple with what happens at that middle point where it's like you have to choose between your stability and love. And this weirdly to me is like almost Jane Austen poo-pooing the idea of marrying someone for comfort over marrying someone for love. Because what you have here is like Anne had opportunities. to secure herself a place in society through what honestly could be a pleasant enough marriage.
Mhm.
And she chose against it because she could not shake what her soul, what her heart was truly feeling.
Mm.
The long-standing adoration of a man who she rejected when she was 19 years old prevents her from even considering any other man.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, it is, like, the most romantic shit Jane's written. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's why this book is so steamy.
Yeah, and it makes for an actual, critique of the idea of marrying someone just because of your place in society that I don't think Jane has really actually dealt with in any of the books we've read so far.
Yeah. I mean, there is the argument to be made that even if they do end up together, like, he has now theoretically made his fortune, so, like, she still will be comfortable, but but we don't know that he's made a fortune, actually. She said that she thinks he's made a fortune because she saw that he got promoted, from the newspaper clippings. But in her father's eyes, he's still so far beneath her that it's not worth thinking about. So, yes, fully agree with what you're saying.
Well, this is actually, like, one of those things you could kind of, like, it's an interesting, and we'll get farther into it as we get farther into the book, but now we can observe this choice from a comfortable distance because this isn't the story. The story isn't what the decision Anne made when she was 19 years old. The story is what is happening to Anne when she's 27 years old, what the difference is there.
Mhm.
And so now it's kind of an academic exercise for Janie, but it is regardless a different academic exercise than she has put us through in the past.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So that would lead us to our standby study questions. Funniest quote?
Okay, this is kind of a conversation. I'm gonna play both roles. This is between Mary and Anne. But you have never asked me one word about our dinner with the Pools yesterday. Did you go then? I have made no inquiries because I concluded you must have been obliged to give up the party. Oh, yes, I went. I was very well yesterday. Nothing at all the matter with me until this morning. It would have been strange if I had not gone. I am very glad you were well enough, and I hope you had a pleasant party. Nothing remarkable. I fucking love
Our
Mary.
queen, our iconic drama queen, Mary, Musgrove, I should say. Her
Yes.
last name is now. Um, Questions moving forward.
Well, now just can't stop thinking about Mrs. Clay and Sir Walter. Is that gonna happen? Because that's kind of a prediction now that I have is that they're gonna get married and then Mrs. Clay is gonna become the lady of the house, and then he's gonna have participated in social climbing, which he abhors, so hypocritical much. So that's kind of a question slash prediction that I have now. And, will when Anne goes back to Kellynch Lodge, will Captain Wentworth be there? And will he have made a fortune? And will he have gotten married? Probably not. I hope not. Oh my god. Yeah, those are my questions.
Who wins the chapter?
Mary.
I love that we read one of the, like, iconic reveals in, like, Jane Austen's work, but, like, it is so true that if you read the next chapter, like, your mind is preoccupied by what an icon and a legend Mary Musgrove is.
Yes.
Because like, we stan a drama queen. Like, we stan a self-centered, vain little bitch who cannot get off the couch.
She just needs her smelling salts and her sister.
She is truly giving all the other hypochondriacs in the series a run for their money. It is beautiful.
I love it.
Iconic, like, no notes.
Yes.
Listeners, that concludes this recording of Pod and Prejudice. For next time, you're going to read chapters 6 and 7 of Persuasion. Molly, how are we feeling?
I can't wait. I'm gonna read it later today.
Well, until next time, stay proper.
And take a stroll and a sigh.
Oh,
Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.